I floored my pickup, the chain snapped the lock like a twig, and the gate flew open, because if I hadn't, the fire would have swallowed Pinewood Hills whole while Karen sipped her wine in a lawn chair. Yeah, you heard that right. A single silver padlock, one woman's obsession with neighborhood aesthetics, and a folding chair nearly turned our sleepy California suburb into a pile of ash. I'm Ethan Miller, and this is the wildest story I've ever lived through. Before I continue the story, write a comment below. Where are you watching from? Like if you want to constantly win in any conflicts. It all started on a Monday morning in Pinewood Hills, the kind of day where the sun's just warm enough to make you forget the world can go up in flames. I was out back, fixing the chicken coop for my hens, Dolly, Loretta, and Patsy, named after my favorite country singers, while my dog Max trotted along the fence line, sniffing for trouble like he's the sheriff of our half-acre lot. I live on the edge of town, where the gravel roads meet the community trail, and my property's got this old metal gate that's been there since my grandpa built the place in the 70s. It's not much to look at, rusty, a little crooked, but it's mine, and it's never caused a problem. Until Karen Harper showed up. I saw her coming down the road like a storm cloud in oversized sunglasses, her blonde hair bouncing with every determined step. She was clutching a clipboard like it was her ticket to the White House, and I swear I could feel the air get colder as she got closer. Karen's the self-appointed queen of the Pinewood Hills HOA, a woman who once fined my neighbor for having a non-compliant mailbox because it was 2 shades too blue. I didn't think much of her march at first. I figured she was on her way to harass someone else about their lawn gnomes. But then she stopped right at my gate, looked around like a cartoon villain, and pulled a shiny silver padlock out of her purse. Before I could even process what was happening, she snapped it onto the gate, gave it a smug little tug, and turned to leave like she'd just won a Nobel Prize for gate locking. I dropped my hammer and jogged over, dust kicking up around my boots. "Hey, Karen, did you just lock my gate?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't even turn around at first, just kept walking, her heels clicking on the gravel. Then she stopped, spun on her heel, and gave me a smile that could curdle milk. "Yes, Ethan, I did," she said, like she was explaining gravity to a toddler. Per HOA Ordinance 27C, all front-facing structures must be secured to maintain visual consistency and safety. Your gate is an eyesore, and I've had complaints. I blinked, my brain trying to catch up with the sheer absurdity of what she'd just said. "Karen, this isn't a front-facing structure. It's a private gate on a private easement. It's not even on HOA land." She adjusted her sunglasses and smirked. "That's what you think. But it's visible from the community trail, which makes it my jurisdiction. I've filed 3 complaints already, and since you ignored them, I took matters into my own hands." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis, like it was the Constitution itself. I stood there, dumbfounded, as she marched off, her victory lap complete. I could have grabbed my bolt cutters right then and there. I keep a pair in the shed for emergencies, but something stopped me. Not because I was scared of Karen, who's about as intimidating as a chihuahua in a power suit, but because I knew what was behind that gate. 10 feet past it, buried under a metal hatch in the gravel, was the emergency water valve for Pinewood Hills backup supply. I'd helped the county install it back in 2019 after a nasty flood took out the main water line. That valve was the only reason we'd survived 3 fire seasons in a row, and now Karen had just locked it away like it was her personal trophy. I shook my head, figuring she'd get bored and move on to her next petty crusade. I mean, how much damage could one padlock do? Famous last words, right? That same afternoon, I watched from my porch as Karen unfolded a lawn chair on her property across the road, plopped herself down with a bottle of kombucha, and started glaring at my gate like it had personally offended her. She even tried to redirect a FedEx driver to a back entrance that doesn't exist, waving her arms like she was directing traffic at LAX. I couldn't help but laugh until I turned on the news that evening and saw the fire warnings. The temperature had spiked to 105 degrees, and the dry brush on the hills east of town was a disaster waiting to happen. By nightfall, I could smell the smoke. Lightning had struck a ridge 5 miles away, and the flames were spreading fast, pushed by a wind that wouldn't quit. I checked my phone. The fire map showed a bright red line creeping straight toward Pinewood Hills. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my boots and ran to the window, and that's when I heard the sirens. Fire trucks were racing down the community trail, their lights flashing red and blue against the darkening sky. They were headed straight for my gate and straight for Karen's padlock. I sprinted outside, my heart pounding in my chest, and what I saw made my blood boil. Karen was still there, now in a silk bathrobe, sipping from a stemless wine glass like she was at a spa retreat. The lead firefighter jumped out of the truck, ran up to the gate, and yanked on the lock. "We need access to the valve now," he shouted. Karen didn't even look up. "This is private property," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I can't allow access without HOA clearance." The firefighter's jaw dropped. I think mine did too. And that's when I knew I had to act, because if I didn't, our whole town was going to burn. I stood there, frozen for a split second, watching Karen sip her wine while the firefighter's face turned redder than the flames creeping closer on the horizon. The sirens wailed, a haunting chorus against the crackling static of the fire radios, and I could already see the orange glow lighting up the hills east of Pinewood Hills. My mind raced. Every second we wasted was another second the fire had to devour more of the dry brush, another second closer to our homes, our town, our lives going up in smoke. I turned and bolted back to my shed, my boots pounding the gravel, knowing I had maybe a minute to fix this before it was too late. As I yanked open the shed door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first, fumbling for the chain I kept on a hook by the workbench, but it kept buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. I finally pulled it out. 3 missed calls from my neighbor, Sarah, who lives up on Maple Drive, closer to the foothills. Her voicemail was a frantic mess. "Ethan, the fire's moving fast. They're evacuating my street. I saw the trucks heading your way. What's going on with the gate? Please tell me it's open." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. Sarah's got 2 kids, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I could picture them grabbing their stuffed animals, wide-eyed and terrified, as the smoke rolled in. I didn't have time to call her back. I grabbed the chain, hooked it to the padlock, and sprinted to my pickup, the same beat-up Ford F-150 I've had since I was 22. My hands were shaking as I tied the other end to the tow hitch, but I forced myself to focus. The fire trucks were still idling, their lights flashing like a desperate SOS, and the firefighter was now arguing with Karen, his voice rising over the chaos. "Ma'am, this valve is a registered emergency asset. You're obstructing a state response." Karen waved her hand like she was shooing a fly. "Then bring me paperwork," she snapped, crossing her legs in that lawn chair like she was at a garden party, not a disaster zone. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I jumped in the truck, turned the key, and floored it. The chain went taut, the lock snapped with a satisfying crack, and the gate flew open, slamming against the fence with a clang that echoed down the trail. The firefighter didn't even look at me. He just waved his crew through, shouting, "Go, go, go." The trucks roared past, kicking up dust as they raced to the valve. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break a rib. For a moment, I thought we dodged the worst of it. But then I heard Karen's voice, sharp and shrill, cutting through the noise like a knife. "You'll be hearing from the HOA about this, Ethan Miller," she screeched, standing up so fast her wine glass tipped over and shattered on the gravel. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisted with rage. "That lock was HOA property, and you just committed vandalism. I've got witnesses." I glanced around. There was no one but me, the retreating fire trucks, and Max, who trotted up to the gate and was now barking at Karen like she was a squirrel he wanted to chase. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Karen, you just blocked a fire response in the middle of a wildfire. I think you've got bigger problems than a broken lock." She huffed, grabbed her lawn chair, and stormed off toward her house, a McMansion at the end of the cul-de-sac that looked like it belonged in a home decor magazine, not a rural suburb like ours. I figured that'd be the end of it, at least for the night. The fire crews were at the valve now, hooking up their hoses, and I could hear the water rushing through the pipes, a sound that felt like a lifeline. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and climbed out of the truck to check on Max. But as I scratched his ears, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from my buddy Ryan, a paralegal who'd helped me with some property paperwork a few years back. "Dude, you okay? Just saw the fire map. Looks bad. Also, heads up, Karen's already posting in the HOA group chat. She's saying you assaulted her authority." I groaned, rubbing my temples. Of course she was. While I was out here trying to make sure Pinewood Hills didn't burn to the ground, Karen was already spinning her narrative, probably typing furiously on her phone with those fake nails of hers, rallying her HOA minions to her cause. I opened the group chat. Sure enough, there was a novel-length post from Karen Harper, complete with emojis of gavels and police cars. "Ethan Miller has violated HOA regulations by destroying association property and endangering community safety," it read. I've documented his non-compliance and will be taking appropriate action. We must maintain order in Pinewood Hills. I stared at the screen, my jaw on the floor. Endangering safety? She'd locked the gate to the emergency valve, and I was the one endangering safety? I was about to type a reply when I heard a shout from the trail. One of the firefighters was jogging back toward me, his face grim. "Ethan, right?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. I nodded. "We've got the water flowing, but the fire's moving faster than we thought. It's already taken out a shed up on Oak Lane, and the wind's pushing it straight toward the elementary school. We're doing everything we can, but if we'd been delayed any longer," he trailed off, shaking his head. I felt my stomach twist. Pinewood Hills Elementary is where Sarah's kids go, where half the town's kids go. I thought of those little faces, the ones I'd seen at the school's fall festival last month, laughing as they bobbed for apples. If that school went up in flames because of Karen's padlock, I'd never forgive myself. I thanked the firefighter and turned back to my house, my mind racing. I needed to call Ryan. He'd know what to do about Karen's HOA threats. But as I dialed his number, I couldn't shake the image of her sitting in that lawn chair, sipping wine while the town teetered on the edge of disaster. She wasn't just clueless, she was dangerous. And I had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. Because while I was watching the fire crews fight for our town, Karen was already plotting her next move, and I had no idea how far she'd go to save face. The firefighter's words hit me like a punch to the gut. Pinewood Hills Elementary, with its bright blue swings and the mural of smiling sunflowers the kids painted last spring, was now in the fire's path. I could still hear the water rushing through the valve, a steady roar that meant the crews were fighting back. But the orange glow on the horizon was growing, spreading like a hungry beast. I clenched my fists, my mind racing with images of those kids, Sarah's little ones, the shy third grader who'd given me a high five at the festival, all of them. If that school burned because of Karen's padlock, I'd never forgive myself. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let her get away with it. I was about to head back to the house to call Ryan when I heard Karen's voice again, cutting through the chaos like a foghorn at a funeral. She'd marched back down the road, her silk bathrobe flapping in the wind, and was now standing at the edge of the trail, yelling at the fire crew. "This is an unauthorized use of private property," she shouted, waving her phone like it was a magic wand. "I demand to speak to your supervisor." The lead firefighter, a guy with a buzz cut and the patience of a saint, turned to her, his face a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of an active fire response. Step back, or I'll have you removed." Karen's jaw dropped, and for a second, I thought she might actually listen. But then she crossed her arms, planted her feet, and doubled down. "I'm the HOA president of Pinewood Hills, and I have every right to oversee this operation. You're trespassing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Trespassing? While the town was fighting for its life. I stepped forward, my voice louder than I meant it to be. "Karen, you locked the gate to the emergency valve. You're the reason they're even delayed in the first place." She spun toward me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me, Ethan Miller. I was protecting our community's aesthetic standards, something you clearly don't care about." I was about to fire back when a gust of wind swept through, carrying the sharp, acrid smell of smoke. It stung my eyes, and I could hear Max whining at my side, his tail tucked as he pressed against my leg. The firefighter glanced at the sky, then at me. "We don't have time for this," he muttered, before turning back to his crew. "Keep the water on the east flank. Don't let it jump the ridge." I watched them work, their movements precise but frantic, and I felt a wave of gratitude mixed with dread. They were doing everything they could, but the fire was relentless. I turned back to Karen, who was now typing furiously on her phone, probably drafting another HOA manifesto to save her reputation. "Karen, do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice low but shaking with anger. "That valve is the only reason this town has a fighting chance right now. If I hadn't broken that lock, we'd be evacuating or worse." She didn't look up, but her lips curled into a smirk. "You broke HOA property, Ethan. That's a $500 fine minimum. And I'll be filing a formal complaint with the board tomorrow morning. You'll regret this." I stared at her, my blood boiling. She was standing there, in the middle of a wildfire, threatening me with fines while the fire crews risked their lives to save us. I wanted to scream, to shake some sense into her, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Karen Harper wasn't just clueless, she was a one-woman wrecking ball, and she'd rather burn the whole town down than admit she was wrong. I turned away, focusing on the fire crews instead, but her words stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Meanwhile, Across town, Sarah was packing her kids into their minivan, her hands trembling as she buckled them in. She'd called me again while I was arguing with Karen, but I'd missed it in the chaos. Her voicemail was even more desperate this time. "Ethan, they're saying the fire's less than a mile from the school. We're heading to the evacuation center at the community college, but I'm so scared. Please tell me the crews got through." I listened to the message as I stood by the gate, the guilt hitting me like a tidal wave. Sarah didn't know about Karen's stunt yet, but when she found out, I knew she'd be furious. Her kids went to that school. We all had people we loved there. Back at the valve, the fire crews were making progress, but the wind wasn't on our side. I could hear snippets of their radio chatter. "It's jumping the creek. We need another unit on the north side." And every word made my chest tighten. I glanced at my phone again, checking the fire map. The red line was closer now, too close, and the evacuation alerts were pinging nonstop. I thought about driving up to the school to help, but I knew I'd just be in the way. The best thing I could do was stay here, make sure the valve stayed accessible, and deal with Karen before she caused any more damage. As the night dragged on, the fire crews managed to hold the line, but not without losses. A barn on Cedar Road went up in flames, and a family on Birch Lane lost their garage before the crews could get there. I heard the news from a paramedic who'd stopped by to grab water from my cooler. I'd set it out by the gate for the crews. "We got lucky," she said, her voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. "If we'd been delayed another 5 minutes, the whole east side of town would have been gone." I nodded, but my stomach churned. 5 minutes. That's how close we'd come to disaster, all because of Karen's obsession with visual consistency. By dawn, the fire was contained, but the air still smelled like charred earth, and a thick haze hung over Pinewood Hills like a bad dream. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from the smoke, but I couldn't rest yet. I knew Karen wasn't done. She'd already promised to make my life miserable, and I had no doubt she'd follow through. As I fed Max and poured myself a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a new email from the HOA. The subject line made my heart sink. "Notice of violation. Unauthorized destruction of association property." They were fining me $750 for breaking the lock, and they'd scheduled an emergency disciplinary hearing for the following week. I sat down hard on my porch steps, staring at the screen. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen had just declared war, and I was going to have to fight back, hard. I sat on my porch steps, the early morning haze still thick with the smell of smoke, staring at the HOA email on my phone like it was a bad joke. A $750 fine for unauthorized destruction of association property, aka the padlock I'd snapped to save Pinewood Hills from burning to the ground. Karen Harper wasn't just petty, she was a master of delusion, spinning her narrative faster than the fire had spread. I could almost picture her in her McMansion, sipping her morning latte, typing up that email with a smug little smile, thinking she'd won. But if she thought I was going to roll over and pay, she had another thing coming. I wasn't just mad, I was furious. And I knew exactly who to call. I dialed Ryan's number, my fingers still shaky from the adrenaline of the night before. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy but sharp. "Ethan, you okay? I heard about the fire, saw the crews heading your way last night." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine, but we've got a problem. Karen locked the gate to the emergency valve, nearly cost us the whole town, and now the HOA is fining me $750 for breaking her stupid padlock. They've scheduled some disciplinary hearing for next week." There was a long pause on the other end, and then I heard Ryan laugh. A low, incredulous chuckle that turned into a full-on cackle. "You're kidding me. She's fining you for saving the town? Oh, this is gold. Send me the email. I'm on my way." While I waited for Ryan, I headed to Maggie's diner to grab some coffee and clear my head. The place was buzzing, every booth packed with folks swapping stories about the fire. As soon as I walked in, the chatter died down, and all eyes turned to me. Maggie, the owner, set down her coffee pot with a thud and crossed her arms. "Ethan Miller, you're the guy with the gate, right?" she asked, her voice loud enough to carry across the room. I nodded, feeling my face heat up. "Yeah, didn't think it'd turn into the town scandal of the year." An older guy at the counter snorted. "Scandal? My sister's place on Birch Lane almost went up in flames because of that woman's lock. You're a hero, kid." I sat down at the counter, grateful for the support, but still on edge. Maggie poured me a coffee, her expression softening. "Word is, Karen's already filed a complaint against you with the HOA board. Claims you damaged community property when you broke that lock." Sheriff laughed it off. But you should know. She's calling herself the safety coordinator now. Told my cousin she's got the authority to inspect our fire extinguishers for compliance. The diner erupted in laughter, but I could feel the tension underneath. Karen had been a thorn in everyone's side for months, fining people for untrimmed hedges, banning unsightly lawn decorations. But this was different. This time, her power trip had nearly cost us everything. Back at my place, Ryan showed up an hour later, his beat-up Jeep parked crooked in my driveway. He walked in with a laptop under one arm and a grin that said he was ready for a fight. "All right, let's see what we're dealing with," he said, plopping down at my kitchen table. I handed him my phone with the HOA email, and he skimmed it, his eyebrows climbing higher with every line. "Wow, she's not just petty, she's unhinged. Look at this. Mr. Miller's actions have set a dangerous precedent for community behavior." Dangerous precedent? You saved the town. He shook his head, already pulling up files on his laptop. "We're going to bury her, Ethan. But we need to be smart about this." Ryan started digging through the county records while I pulled out the old blueprints I'd kept from the 2019 valve installation. I'd worked with the county to design the system after the flood, and I knew every detail of that easement like the back of my hand. Sure enough, we found the original agreement, signed by the HOA board back in 2018, stating that the gate was a designated emergency access point and could not be obstructed under any circumstances. "This is our golden ticket," Ryan said, pointing to a clause about perpetual unobstructed access. Not only did Karen violate local codes by locking the gate, but she might have just stepped into federal territory. That valve was upgraded with FEMA funds in 2020. It's a homeland security asset. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. "So you're saying she committed a felony?" Ryan nodded, his grin widening. "Potentially. And if she filed that lock as an HOA improvement, the whole board could be on the hook for obstructing a federal utility. We're talking serious consequences here." I felt a spark of hope for the first time since the fire, but it was quickly doused when my phone buzzed with another email from the HOA. This time, it was a cease and desist letter, accusing me of creating an unsafe environment by breaking the lock and demanding I pay an additional $300 for administrative fees. I showed it to Ryan, and he laughed again, but this time it was colder, more determined. "Oh, she's digging her own grave now. Let's keep going." While Ryan worked on drafting a formal complaint to the county, I stepped outside to check on Max, who was sniffing around the gate like nothing had happened. But as I stood there, I saw a familiar figure marching down the road. Karen, in a pristine white blazer and heels, her clipboard back in hand. She stopped at the gate, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the broken lock, which I'd hung on my porch with a little sign that read, "Warning, may cause wildfires." I couldn't help but smirk as she read it, her face turning a shade of red that matched the fire trucks from the night before. "Ethan, this is unacceptable," she snapped, waving her clipboard at me. "You've defaced HOA property and mocked my authority. I'm adding this to your violations." I crossed my arms, leaning against the gate. "Karen, you do realize you're under investigation by the county for blocking emergency access, right? I'd focus on that if I were you." Her eyes widened for a split second, but then she straightened up, her smile icy. "You're bluffing. I've got the board on my side, and we'll see who's laughing at the hearing next week." She turned on her heel and marched off, but not before tossing a thick envelope at my feet, a summons to the HOA hearing, complete with a list of my infractions. I picked it up, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and determination. Karen wasn't just fighting dirty, she was fighting stupid. And with Ryan on my side, I knew we had a chance to turn this around. But as I walked back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about to get a whole lot messier before it got better. I stood there by the gate, the HOA summons crumpled in my hand, watching Karen's white blazer disappear down the road like a storm cloud on heels. Her threats echoed in my head. "We'll see who's laughing at the hearing," and I felt a fire in my chest that had nothing to do with the wildfire we just survived. Karen Harper wasn't just a nuisance. She was a walking disaster, and I was done letting her wreak havoc on Pinewood Hills. I marched back inside, where Ryan was still hunched over his laptop, a grin spreading across his face like he'd just found buried treasure. "Ethan, you're not gonna believe this," he said, spinning the screen toward me. "We've got her." He pointed to a scanned email from 2018, part of the HOA's own records, where the board had acknowledged the emergency easement for my gate and agreed to keep it unobstructed in perpetuity. But that wasn't the best part. Ryan had also found a group chat screenshot from Karen herself, sent to a board member named Greg the day she locked the gate. "He can't prove it's a federal easement," she'd written, followed by a winking emoji. "By the time he figures it out, he'll be drowning in fines." I stared at the screen, my jaw on the floor. "She knew," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She knew the gate was critical, and she locked it anyway." Ryan nodded, his eyes gleaming. "This isn't just negligence, Ethan. This is intent. We're taking this to the county and the state." While Ryan filed our complaint with the county zoning office, I couldn't sit still. I needed to know how the town was holding up after the fire. I drove to the community center, where volunteers were handing out water and blankets to families who'd been evacuated. Sarah was there, her kids clinging to her legs, their faces smudged with soot but safe. She spotted me and ran over, pulling me into a hug. "Ethan, thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I heard what you did at the gate. If you hadn't gotten it open, we might have lost everything." I hugged her back, but my mind was still on Karen. "Did you hear about the HOA?" I asked. Sarah's face darkened. "Oh, I heard. Karen's been telling everyone you vandalized her lock to undermine her authority. She's trying to spin this like she's the victim." I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up again. But before I could say anything, a news van pulled into the parking lot, Channel 7, followed by Channel 12. A reporter with a microphone hopped out, scanning the crowd, and I knew exactly what was coming. Someone, maybe Sarah, maybe one of the firefighters, had leaked the story. Within hours, the headlines were everywhere. Local HOA president blocks emergency access during wildfire, claims authority over county infrastructure. The footage from the fire night started circulating online, showing Karen in her bathrobe, arguing with the fire crew while the sky glowed orange behind her. Social media exploded with memes. One showed Karen's face on a medieval gatekeeper with the caption, "None shall pass without HOA approval." Another had her lawn chair photoshopped into a burning forest, with firefighters standing helplessly behind a locked gate. By noon, the story had gone viral, and Karen did what she always did when the spotlight turned against her. She went live on Facebook. I watched the stream from my kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand, as she sat in her perfectly manicured backyard, a glass of rose on the table beside her. "I only did what I believed was necessary to preserve the safety and integrity of Pinewood Hills," she said, her voice soft and syrupy, like she was auditioning for a Hallmark movie. At no point was I informed of the gate's critical status, and had I known, I would have taken different actions. The media is twisting the facts. I'm not the villain here. I nearly choked on my coffee. Not informed? She literally bragged about knowing in that group chat. Her little performance backfired spectacularly. The comments on her live stream were a flood of outrage. "You almost burned our town down. My kids were evacuated because of you." And within hours, a woman named Lisa, who I'd met at the community center, started a petition to remove Karen from the HOA board. It gained 300 signatures in less than a day. Meanwhile, the state fire marshal held a press conference, and I watched from my living room as he stood at a podium, his expression grim. "We are classifying the obstruction of the Pinewood Hills emergency valve as a breach of state response protocols," he said, his voice steady but firm. "We've launched a full investigation into the actions of local homeowners associations that may have contributed to delays during the recent wildfire." Behind him, a graphic showed a red arrow pointing straight at Karen's property, and I couldn't help but smile. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA, but this time it wasn't a fine. It was a carefully worded letter, practically dripping with panic, stating that the board had reconsidered the temporary suspension of the easement due to newly revealed information. They were backpedaling so fast I could almost hear the tires screeching. But I wasn't done. Ryan and I found an old HOA bylaw that allowed homeowners to call for an emergency vote to remove a board member who posed demonstrable harm to the community. It hadn't been used since the 90s, but it was still on the books. We gathered signatures, Sarah, Lisa, even Maggie from the diner signed on, and scheduled the vote for the following week. The day of the vote, the town hall was packed, standing room only. I stood at the front, a rolled-up blueprint of the valve system in one hand, a folder of emails and documents in the other. Karen sat in the front row, her white blazer pristine, her smile as smug as ever. Mayor Carter opened the meeting with a simple question. "Can someone explain what happened at Gate 12 during the fire response?" I stepped forward, laying the blueprint on the table. "This gate isn't just a gate," I said. my voice steady despite the nerves. It's the only access point to the emergency water valve that saved Pinewood Hills. Karen locked it, knowing it was critical, and nearly cost us everything. I handed over the group chat screenshots, the easement agreement, and the FEMA funding records. The room went silent, then erupted in gasps. Karen tried to interrupt, but Mayor Carter shut her down. "Mrs. Harper, you have your chance to speak." She didn't get much of a chance, though. The evidence was damning, and when the vote came, it wasn't even close. Karen was out, effective immediately. As she stormed out of the hall, her clipboard tucked under her arm, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We'd won. But I knew this wasn't the end, not quite yet. The town hall doors swung shut behind Karen, her heels echoing down the hallway as she stormed out, her clipboard limp at her side. The room erupted in applause, a wave of relief washing over Pinewood Hills like a cool breeze after a scorching day. I stood there, the blueprint still on the table, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. We'd done it. Karen Harper was out of the HOA, her reign of terror finally over. But as the crowd started to file out, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story needed a proper ending, one that made sure no one like her could ever pull a stunt like that again. So, let's wrap this up, and if you've been with me this whole way, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories from Pinewood Hills, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. The next morning, I met with Tom, the new interim HOA president, at the gate that had caused all the chaos. Tom was a retired mechanic with a no-nonsense vibe, the kind of guy who'd rather fix a problem than write a 10-page complaint about it. The fire department had already installed a new smart lock system, keyless, tied to dispatch, so emergency crews could open the gate with a remote signal. No more padlocks, no more lawn chairs, no more Karen. "This is how it should have been from the start," Tom said, testing the gate as it slid open with a soft beep. I nodded, running my hand over the metal, noticing the faint scratch where Karen's lock had been. That scratch was a reminder of how close we'd come to disaster and how far we'd come since. The HOA didn't just stop at the gate upgrade. They dropped all the fines against me, issued a public apology to the county, and even covered the cost of the new system out of their reserve fund. I heard that last part stung for the board, but they had no choice. Karen's mess had tanked their credibility, and they were desperate to rebuild trust. A few days later, the fire department hosted a safety drill at the community park, and it turned into a full-blown block party. Fire trucks rolled in, paramedics ran mock drills, and volunteers handed out snow cones to the kids. Sarah's little ones were there, laughing as they sprayed a hose under a firefighter's watchful eye, and I felt a lump in my throat watching them. They were safe because we'd fought back. At the drill, the fire chief pulled me aside and handed me a small plaque, "Pinewood Hills Safety Advocate." I laughed, holding it up. "Does this come with a cape?" I asked. He chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder. "You've earned it, Ethan. That gate saved more than you know." As I stood there, plaque in hand, I spotted a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Karen, in a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, looking like she was trying to blend into a spy movie. She didn't say a word, just watched the new gate system in action, her face unreadable. After a moment, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the road. I didn't feel sorry for her, not after everything, but I hoped she'd learned something. A week later, I got an unexpected email from the HOA. I'd been nominated as the new Community Safety Liaison, a non-voting role to advise the board. I laughed, thinking back to the chaos of the past few weeks, but I accepted. If I could keep another Karen from rising, I'd do it. My first meeting with the new board was a breath of fresh air. No fines, no drama, just actual progress. We updated safety protocols, voted on fire-safe landscaping, and planned a second emergency valve with direct road access, far from any HOA property. Pinewood Hills was finally moving forward. The county hosted a first responders appreciation event a month later, and I was called up to the stage. I'm not one for speeches, but I looked out at the crowd, Sarah, Lisa, Maggie, the firefighters, and thought about what that gate meant. "One lock can stop a town," I said, my voice steady. "But one voice can stop that lock. So speak up." They clapped, and I stepped down, ready to leave this chapter behind. Karen kept a low profile after that, though I heard she tried to start a neighborhood improvement committee. It didn't go anywhere. Turns out, people don't trust someone who nearly burned their town down. As for me, I'm still here, helping with fire drills and water conservation projects, making sure Pinewood Hills stays safe. And every time I pass that gate, I smile at the scratch from Karen's lock, a tiny mark that tells a big story about fighting for what's right.